You're listening to The Disconnect, a podcast about anxiety and how it disconnects you from your normal self. We're here to share our journey and help you through yours to show you you're not alone. And now, your hosts, Austin Grant and Lindsey Jones. Welcome to episode 15 of The Disconnect. For those who have been following along with us, welcome back. If you're just tuning in for the first time, we're so glad that you're listening. In the most recent episode, The New Normal, we discussed how we are adjusting to things and what this idea of a new normal looks like during this quarantine. And today we're going to talk about managing negative thoughts during these times. And so initially when I began, we began planning this episode and starting to think about it. Immediately, one of the first things that had come to mind was, it reminded me a lot of the episode where we talked about staying mindful when your mind is full. If you haven't listened to that episode, definitely give it a listen. We talk about some good things, and I just enjoyed that episode, and a lot of the stuff that we talked about was pretty relative with the whole idea of mindfulness, and I think that goes hand in hand with this idea of like combating negative thinking and how to reframe that negative mindset when so many things are coming in at every hour of the day. It's easy to get bogged down, and so I think these episodes will be a lot similar. So, but yeah, to get started here, what are your thoughts on negativity? Do you find yourself struggling with this lately, or at all, during this period of quarantine, or have you been pretty good at like avoiding that, or just creating a space to where you're not falling into negative thought patterns, or?
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned this with the mindfulness episode that we did previously. It took me a very long time to get used to working from home and being away from everybody. Even though I'm an introvert at heart, it was really hard for me to transition to working from home and not being able to be around my coworkers all the time, and kind of getting used to that new normal that we talk about. But at first, it was very hard to kind of keep from being negative and from experiencing those negative thoughts. And I think that that's definitely a normal reaction. Like it's really hard when you have your entire world turned upside down, and not looking at it in a negative way is really difficult sometimes, especially when we have all these things that we planned out. Like I was planning on taking my brother to Disneyland. I was planning on going to a concert. I was planning all these things. And it's really hard when you have to reschedule those things to not be negative about them. And so it's been a challenge to stay positive during everything that's happening and to not look at this as the world is ending and it's never going to go back to normal and it's never going to be the same ever again. And while it might not be the same as it used to be when we, before everything started, I think there can be some comfort in the fact that we're all going through this together, and whatever our new normal coming out of this will be, we all get to face together. Um, so I think for me, a large portion of those negative thoughts just came from the uncertainty of everything. Because as human beings, we just naturally crave certainty and predictability. And so I think a lot of what we're going through right now is uncertain, and that's where those negative thoughts come in. How do you feel about your negative thoughts? How are you handling them?
I think I'm doing pretty good. Like I know there's not too many times where I find myself falling down those types of negative thought patterns. Um, I think it like it's easy or it's hard to depict between the negativity because like you think of like this idea of like the quarantine, you're working from home, and then like there's all this talk of like the economy crashing or the economy going down, um, and then you're thinking like, okay, well, you're jumping through here and now we're working from home. Like, is this gonna be something that's stable? Like, can I rely on this, or is it gonna be out of the blue to where we're gonna get laid off, or like I know, remember you talked about with Jacob, there was some uncertainty there with whether or not he was gonna face that, and so it's easy to kind of fall into that rabbit hole of like, oh, he's going to lose his job. He's not going to be able to find another job, especially during these times. And I think that's the biggest piece is like on that topic of like, oh, well, if we lost our jobs right now, it's really difficult to try and find another job. And so I think of, a big piece to that is like, that, and that's where I've been like falling into those negative patterns is, as I'm approaching the end of this degree, trying to figure out, okay, what's next? Like, obviously this is terrible timing, and especially for those graduating and looking to enter the workforce right now, like it's such a difficult time to kind of enter the workforce and gain employment, and so it's easy to fall on that. Oh well, I'm finishing on my school because of everything that's going on, places aren't going to be hiring or they're not going to be hiring for a couple months. So I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I think for me, the negative mindset's like, oh, well, I'm thankful I have my job right now, but, I'm kind of preparing and trying to figure out what's next and, trying to apply and kind of get myself out there and, putting all this pressure on myself, with applications and interviews and not hearing back, like it's so easy to kind of fall into that negative pattern. But then I'm like, having to kind of stop myself and be like, well, if you really think about it, it's most of it's not even anything on my part. It's simply just a matter of the times that we're in. As to why maybe people are not responding or not following up on applications or hiring. And that's just one example of I think the biggest example of kind of what I've experienced now, it's like, okay, one thing after another, you kind of spiral down. Well, if I'm not doing that, or if I can't get this, especially during these times, how long is this going to last? How long are the effects of the economy or everything going to affect the uh, workforce? Or with all these unemployment rates, when people go back to get jobs, like it's going to be and it's just on and on and on down that like negative like mindset. And so I kind of have to, take a step back and kind of center in on the present and focus, okay, like, you know, what may feel like something, all these different things that I just mentioned, when I really just take a step back, think about it, it's like, okay, that's all in my mind. Could be true, but it very well could be not true. And so it kind of goes back to the same piece with like, kind of like an anxiety piece to it. Like, you can spend your day worrying about it. You can, but that's not going to change anything. So you can spend your day thinking negatively towards one thing, or having that negative mentality towards it, but it doesn't necessarily change the outcome. And so I think it's super important, especially with everything going on, to, you can sit at home, be a negative Nancy, and, you know, carry that out, whatever that looks like for you. You're avoiding talking to your friends or your family or whatever it may be, and just completely kind of shut down. And that's not going to do any good for your mental health, when we're trying to carry through this pandemic and get through, however long is left in this quarantine. And so it's interesting, just kind of thinking of like the last 2 months, 2.5 months, and how many times I just not even conscious that I've fallen into negative patterns just because of what's being portrayed on the news or what I'm hearing from friends and family. And, so I have to constantly be mindful of that, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, there's a lot of there's a really big reason why mindfulness right now is so important, because it's so easy to fall into those negative thought patterns. Because like I think for me, like it's easier to fall into the negative thought patterns because I don't have a positive routine set, because it took me so long to reestablish some kind of routine once I had started working from home. And like kind of like I was mentioning before, like as human beings, we crave routine. Like whether it's, knowing that the trash is going to be picked up every day, or like on the same day every week. And then when that doesn't happen, you kind of have like these varying degrees of like frustrated reactions to it. And I think it's important to understand how you personally react to those situations. So like you were saying, like it's really easy to fall into those negative thought patterns, and it is for me too. And understanding that that's how I'm going to react to certain situations has really helped me understand myself better and get myself out of those negative thought patterns, because I know like if something goes wrong, like I am a creature of habit. If something goes awry or if something doesn't happen on time, I get upset about it. I don't react to the degree of like if my trash doesn't get picked up, I'm going to call the city and complain about it, but I will be frustrated about it, and it will kind of put a damper on the rest of my day of like, man, I really need my trash picked up or something like that. And so like just understanding yourself and understanding how you're personally going to react, I think is really important. Because it also kind of helps you give yourself some grace, so you know that like if you know yourself and you know that this is going to be a hard time for you, and you react in a way that you don't that like isn't productive, you can at least tell yourself like it's okay that I reacted this way. It's okay that I might not be handling quarantine very well. I might be upset, or I might be, sad about it, or I might be mourning the loss of certain things. And it's okay to feel that way, and giving yourself the grace and the room to kind of take care of yourself in those moments. And then understanding like those feelings don't have to last forever. Like you can do certain things to help you, get out of that. So there's this really great example with one of our coworkers talks about flipping your lid. And so if you think about like, you have this like animal brain, and it's sitting underneath your, normal resilient your resilient brain that can help you understand the world around you. And when you get upset, you kind of flip your lid, and you're all of a sudden thinking with your lizard brain. And it's interesting to recognize those moments in yourself, and to be able to understand when that's happening, so that you can kind of bring yourself back to the the reality of what's happening, and stop thinking so much with your emotional lizard brain. And so if you understand how you're going to react to those situations, and you know that like you're in a specific headspace, and you're super hyper emotional about something, or you're emotionally hijacked, and you need to focus on bringing yourself back down to some sort of normal logical behavior, there are some things that you can do, that can kind of bring you back into that mind space. And I think probably one of my favorite things is focusing on your breathing. So if you breathe in a 6-3-9 pattern, so you breathe in for 6, hold for 3, and breathe out for 9, it helps you focus yourself and focus your attention on the present, and helps you bring yourself back down to a normal thought pattern, so that you don't have to keep reacting to the situation in a really hyper emotional, hypersensitive way. It helps you kind of look at things in a more rational viewpoint because you're focusing in on your breathing and you're bringing yourself down to a more calm level, if that makes sense. And I think that that's something that has really helped me, particularly during this time, because when everything was happening, I was having like panic attacks all the time because, like you were talking about, like, what if my brother loses his job? What if I lose my job? What if we can't afford to sustain the life that we've built? And I know that that was a big fear for a lot of people. And being able to bring myself back down to a rational way of thinking and realizing, like, okay, if I were to lose my job, how would I make up my income? Where would I go to get the money that I need to sustain my household? And I kept thinking, like, okay, I could sign up for Postmates, or I could be a delivery driver, or I could do, certain things for people. And I know Jacob started doing that too, where, he signed up for Instacart and Postmates, and he started doing odd jobs for people around town, just kind of understanding how to make up that loss of income if it were to happen. And thankfully, neither of us have had to experience that yet, but knowing that we do have those skills in our back pocket, and knowing that we have a safety net has really helped kind of keep some of those more negative thoughts away. So you kind of have to look at something from a rational point of view um, before you can kind of use it to to make yourself feel better, I guess, is being able to kind of rationalize what's happening and rationalize a response to it, when you're not feeling hyperly emotional about something.
Yeah, so I found a article from KATV News that talked about managing or overcoming catastrophic thoughts during a global pandemic. And so I was kind of reading through the article and found some pretty interesting thoughts, and um, figured we could share them, go through them and kind of talk about them and see, if we can relate to them and kind of what that looks like. Um, and so a big thing that they talk about is this idea of like managing your um, managing like your cognitive distortion, or like blocking cognitive distortion. And so like the first tip that they recommend um, is recognizing your thoughts. And so noticing your thoughts when they happen can help you identify the source. And so like um, asking yourself why you may be thinking this way, or this one I really struggle with, whether you're too hard on yourself, and I think negatively. And that's just even before quarantine. I definitely resonate with something like this, just because it's like, I've always been super hard on myself, and so unless somebody's telling me I'm doing something good, or like, I'm gonna be thinking negatively. I'm gonna be thinking on what I can do to do better. And so in the context of the quarantine and what this has looked like, just even on the topic of an example that they use in the article as well is like, oh, if the stay-at-home orders aren't lifted soon, the economy will shut down and everyone will lose their jobs. Well, it's not like, yeah, that could happen, but with how things are moving, and it's not likely that that's going to happen, and so it's easy to blow it out of proportions in that context. Um, and so really addressing like, okay, well, why am I thinking that way? Did I hear somebody say, or did I see something on social media that led me to think, oh, the economy's crashed? Like, here's what here's how we respond, and so what when you really think about it, like kind of identifying and paying attention to those thoughts, I think it can really help with respect to managing those types of, oh well, no, and it's it's something that I'd heard on the news, or it's something that I heard from a friend, and so there may or may not be any credibility to the source that you heard that from, and so immediately you can kind of recognize those thoughts and rationalize them a little bit. It's kind of like that piece, or I forget which episode it was. It may have been the mindfulness one, but um, that idea of like, your frontal cortex kind of bringing sense to some things. And so when you're focusing and recognizing and calling out those thoughts, you're allowing yourself to kind of rationalize. Okay, well, this could happen, but I'm going to choose not to go down that path, or that thought pattern, because of X, Y, Z, or whatever your brain thinks of, or your mind goes to rationalize that. And so I don't know. I think it's a good point. Um, and it's definitely important when trying to combat negative thinking. With everything going on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, you can look at things like kind of like you were saying, like, oh man, the economy's going to collapse and we're all going to lose our jobs and everything's going to be horrible. Like, you can look at things like that, but you have to recognize that, like, the reality of the situation is that's probably not going to happen. Um, and putting logic to your thoughts and being able to kind of rationalize them with logic. And I think for me, like, a really big part of being emotionally hijacked like that and having to deal with these thoughts that are just so off the wall crazy is adding logic to them and being able to logic my way out of emotional situations. Like, I'm a very hyper emotional person. And being able to look at something with a logical, critical lens and realize, like, okay, I may think that this is going to happen, but the reality of it is it's going to turn out completely different than what I am even anticipating. So, um, just recognizing that, like, what you think may happen isn't necessarily going to happen, and that you have to apply logic to the kind of out there crazy thoughts that you might be having.
The next one, definitely something we've talked a lot about in several of our episodes. It's focusing on what you can control. Um, and I mean, this one speaks for itself. I don't think it can be overstated, just because when you get down to it, like, you're sitting here thinking, okay, well, the economy could crash, I could lose my job, and not able to find another one, or whatever the situation may be. Um, but if you kind of dial that back in a little bit and focus on what you control, well, you know, I can control my news intake. I can control what I'm kind of spending my time focusing on. I can control. You may not be able to control the influence that other people may try and impose on you, but at the same time, it just goes to show, like, that concept of the first one, recognizing your thoughts and thinking negatively. And if you're going down that rabbit hole, and you're trying to justify, or identify the source of what that negativity may be coming from, and you're like, oh well, I'm just going to look this up on the internet. Will the economy collapse? And so if you're searching for those types of things, I mean, I can guarantee you're gonna find something for that, because you're searching for it. And so this idea of focusing on what you can control what you're doing with these thoughts. Your thoughts in your head, in your mind. You can choose to express those outwardly, however that looks like for you, or like, really, just when it boils down to it, just focusing on, okay, kind of like that idea of frontal cortex. Now that my frontal cortex has gone through and process, rationalized a bit, brought some logic, brought some sense to it. What am I going to do with that? I could not go on a tangent, try and feed the fire, and trying to get everybody else psyched up, whatever. Or I can just accept it at that and keep moving on, or just finding other ways, through these times. Like, You can control what you're eating, you can control what you're drinking, you can control what you're watching, you can control, a lot of different things that you may or may not have had control over um, pre-quarantine, when it was just wake up, go to work, come home. Now it's like it's this new normal that we keep talking about. Um, and so I think it's one of the most important pieces to combating the negative uh, mindset is truly focusing on the things you can control, and those that you can't. I mean, we've talked about it before. Don't waste your breath or don't waste your energy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you bring up is like making sure that you understand the pieces of this that you can control will allow you to regain control of your own situation. So, like, my favorite analogy is like you can't prevent a storm from happening, right? Like you can't prevent a thunderstorm, but you can prepare for it. And so, kind of like I was talking about before, like how are you going to prepare for if you did lose your job? How are you going to prepare for that? So, like, my brother and I, we looked at our budget. We actually sat down and started looking at like how much money do we make right now? How many bills do we have? What can we cut back on? What do we actually hard numbers need to make in order to keep our lifestyle? Is there any leeway in any of the bills that we're paying? So I know that a lot of companies for a long time were, and I don't know if they're still doing it, but I know that they were giving people some grace period of having to pay like their car bills, or I know student loans are on a deferment until September. And so looking at those things that you do have to pay, and then reaching out to the companies and understanding like what their grace periods are and what it actually means to work with them through those times. I think another big reason why it's so hard to lose control is because there's so much uncertainty to what the future looks like. And uncertainty really is centered around worries about what the future holds and really anticipating what is going to happen and filling in those gaps with whatever your brain can come up with in those moments of, maybe you're feeling super anxious about something, and you are thinking about what the future may hold, and those anxious thoughts and those negative thoughts are really driving what your idea of the future may look like. And I think understanding that you're by focusing on the present moment and focusing on what you can control, it's a way of interrupting those negative thoughts, and helping you kind of bring yourself back to what is actually happening and what you actually have control over, rather than focusing on predictions for the future that might not even happen. Um, and so I think like interrupting that negative thought pattern with your um, focusing on the present is a really strong tool that you can add to your toolbox. Um, Especially like if you incorporate it with um, something that you can control. So, like, you can control what you're having for dinner tonight, you can control what you wear tomorrow to work or to working from home. You can control all these different things that you may not realize that you have control over when you're feeling particularly anxious or emotionally hijacked.
Yeah, and that article has a couple other points there. We'll link the we'll have a link to that article in the show notes. But I did find another article, or actually it was another news station in Jacksonville that had they had like a video on some tips on how to stop negative thoughts post COVID-19 that I thought was really cool. And so some of the main takeaways from them, the biggest one for them was practice temporal distancing. And so this idea of focusing on a longer time scale, whereas things are uncertain right now, or we're not sure what they're going to look like in the coming weeks. And it's easy to kind of follow negative patterns of like, oh, well, now that everything's coming back to normal, things are opening up, and gyms and haircut, you name it. Like, it's so easy to fall in this negative mindset of like, oh, you know, people are just being stupid, and people are never going to change, or things are just going to go right back to what we were, and we're going to go back into quarantine and this whole idea. And so they kind of stress the importance of kind of taking a step back from that and like thinking, okay, well, things may be tough right now, and it's kind of hard to see the light through this, or see through everything that's going on, or what may be happening here in the coming weeks. But the idea of, well, what about a year from now? What about a couple years? Where will I be, or what will we have learned from this whole experience a year from now? And we're looking back like, oh yeah, COVID-19 was crazy, but here's what I got out of it. And so this one kind of relates to me in the sense of last summer when I was like at the worst, in the peak of my anxiety crisis, or however you want to call it. I remember this topic of like, oh, I'm gonna get through this, and think about like, oh, like, what that whole saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You're gonna come out on top of this, and just think of yourself 6 months from now, and once we get through this. And I'm just like, well, that's great and all, but like, I can't even I can't even think through tomorrow. Like, how am I supposed to, but now that I'm in that point, now that I've come all this way, and I'm looking back, I'm like, wow, like, if only future me could have told past me or present me at that time, like, yeah, it's going to be okay. Like, don't stress, don't worry about it. And so this idea of when things, or as things right now, is just slowly approach or attempt to get back to some sense of normalcy, to kind of think about it and kind of, be patient with it. Things are not just going to jump back and we're just going to be, right back in the swing of things. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of changes, and they're already implementing a lot of changes with, like even today, my mom was sending me something about how they're making changes to the public elementary school system and how that's going to work, and it's crazy. Like, all of the changes and things that will be necessary when we go back into there. And so it's so easy to think, oh, this is stupid. This is never going to work. This is exactly what we were doing before, or, whatever it may be. We're kind of taking a step back and think like, oh, well, if we get this done now, a year from now, what's that going to look like? Are we going to be able to, carry on these social distancing techniques, for the foreseeable future, even past all of this, or, and so I think that idea of the temporal distancing is pretty neat.
Yeah, I really agree with that, and I really like the temporal distancing. I think it's important to think about the future, because I think it's important to interrupt your negative thought stream with those positive thoughts for the future. So I think it's important to like make plans for the future right now. I know my brother and we've rescheduled our Disneyland trip for September, so I know we're gonna try to go then. And while that may seem like a far way away from now, I have to remember that the time will pass anyway. So whether I like it or not, September will come to us eventually. And the same goes for, everything that we're going through right now. Like, the time will pass. It might seem crazy right now, and it might seem like there's no end in sight to this quarantine. There's no end in sight to, the social distancing and all that stuff. But you have to recognize that the time will pass, and the world won't be like this forever. Um, it might look different than what we think it would look like when we come back, but it will by no means be be as it is right now, at least as crazy as it is right now. Um, and I think really holding on to that mindset of like this will pass, it will be okay eventually. We just have to kind of get through this rough patch right now, and we'll make it out the other side, and we'll learn some things along the way. Um, and I think like right now, if you are taking the time to kind of work through some of these more difficult um, ideas with yourself, and you're really struggling and having a hard time, but you're working on it, I think you should be proud of yourself for recognizing that this is a hard time for a lot of people, and you're trying your best, and that's the best you can do. And if that's the best you can do, then you should be damn proud of that. Because I keep thinking of this quote that I heard, and I don't even remember where I heard it, but so we keep comparing ourselves to the progress that we were making before everything started. And by no means is the world the same. So, like, your idea of being productive in a day is based on your old understanding of what productivity is. So if you're having a really hard time and you just get out of bed and put some clothes on and maybe go for a walk that day, and that's the best that you can do, then that is still productive, and that is still better than what you may have thought that you could do. And so being patient with yourself and giving yourself the opportunity to learn from these situations, I think, is really important.
All right, the next one, kind of similar to the previous one and kind of what we've talked about before, is just finding ways to disconnect from those negative situations, whether that be the news, the social media, the TV, the friends and family chatting about it all the time, and constantly kind of filling your life with noise. Um, kind of just taking time away from that, unplugging from that, and I know I've mentioned in the past in previous episodes of just like, for me, I don't like there was never really a point where I was like staying up to date on statistics and when everything was so new and people were getting infected and sick and the death rates and spreading the U.S. and the whole chaos that ensued from everything when it was like middle to end of March and into April. And I mean, I just sat there and I just like, I told myself, I was like, I'm not going to sit here and pay attention. Like, I mean, if the news was important enough or if something was that important that I needed to know about it, chances are I would find out about it one way or the other, but I didn't go out there and actively, you know, look up like, oh, what's the death toll of today? Like I wasn't like pursuing those things, and I think that really helps, just kind of pulling yourself away from those situations to protect your thought process.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think kind of setting those boundaries for yourself and not seeking out bad news just to stay updated. Kind of like you're saying, like if if you're gonna find out about it, you're gonna find out about it. Like if it's big enough for you to hear about it, you will hear about it. Um, and I know it's kind of hard to separate yourself from that because everybody's talking about it. Everybody is constantly saying oh, this is how many cases there are, and this is what's happening, and people are obsessed with learning about what's happening and keeping up to date. But I think it's important to separate yourself from that, especially if you're easily overwhelmed by it. Because I know I was personally very overwhelmed by it when I first started hearing about everything that was happening, and it was really hard for me to stay positive when all of this stuff was happening. And I was hearing stories of people dying, and families being having to go through all this really really tragic stuff. And it was really hard for me to separate myself from it, and so I just eventually had to stop. just stop paying attention to the news. Like I could not physically do it anymore. Because it was detrimental to my mental health. Um, and since I've stopped kind of searching out those news pieces and paying attention to what all is happening with that, it has been a lot easier to cope with everything that's happening.
The next 2 points kind of go hand in hand with the other article. It's don't fall victim to cognitive distortions and identifying the negative thoughts. And so, kind of as we'd already touched on, super important there. But then the last one, and I think it's one of the most important ones too, is this idea of sticking to routines. And I think this kind of hits too. Just because, like, normally with me, like, I'm huge into routines, and once I fall out of routines, whether it's waking up and taking a shower, well, me saying no to the shower is likely to lead to that small decision at that point in the morning, is likely to unfold and pan out to, oh well, maybe I'm not feeling my walk today, and I don't go on the walk, or maybe I'm not, I don't want to cook, so it's just this like negative kind of this negative feedback loop that you kind of fall into, all from that one decision, that started in the morning. You didn't stick with your routine, you didn't wake up, you didn't take a shower immediately, so something as small as that can be pivotal in the outcome of your day. And so I've tried to be mindful of that. Well, I lost my morning routine of being able to go to the gym during this time, and had to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And, spiraling down this negative, like, oh, well, that was good while it lasted, and here goes to continuing my New Year's resolution into the end of 2020 of trying to stay in shape, and all of this negativity that I fell into. And then it's just like, well, I can still stick to my morning routine of getting up and doing my journaling and getting some breakfast, and then I've had to create a new routine of as we're working from home, and it's opened up the possibilities and the opportunities for me to be able to like take the dogs on a walk, at lunch, and so that's become a routine, and so sticking to those is really important, just because it's been nice and it gets me out, and so I think it does help. You're sticking to your routine, and it's I think it's it goes hand in hand with like that self care piece of just like establishing a good morning routine, but also just sticking to those routines helps you stay in that positive mindset, and not making it a little easier for you. Well, I already skipped this, so I'm not gonna go on another walk, or I'm just gonna watch Netflix for the right, and so I'm constantly having to like sit there and catch myself, um, as I'm, noticing, well, I didn't, that idea of like the productivity and so on and so forth. It's like, well, I didn't really have much of a routine today. I just kind of sluggishly woke up and didn't do anything, and so it's just like sticking to the routine. I never really thought of it that way with respect to like having an impact on negative thinking, until this time, and I started to really pay attention to it more.
Yeah, I think routines are really important, and I know that we've kind of talked about that before. Even something as small as like just making your bed in the morning, and just kind of taking the time to focus on accomplishing one thing in the morning. Um, I know that's really helped me. I make my bed. I make it a point to like make my bed every morning, and then I'll usually go to the kitchen and make myself a cup of decaf coffee. And I've really found that like sticking to that and being accountable to myself has really helped me stay in some kind of positive mind space. Like even if I don't accomplish anything else during the day, I've already made my bed and done something to take care of myself and to practice self-care with even if it's something as small as like making some tea or a cup of coffee in the morning. um, just taking some time for yourself in the morning to just accomplish one thing can really kind of set that ball rolling for the rest of your day. And I know that that's helped me make sure that I'm, again, accountable to myself and accountable to um, kind of those around me. Because if I'm in a bad mood, then it's probably going to, be reflected in my interactions with the people that I'm closest to. And when we're all kind of quarantined together, I think it's important to really understand how you're behaving and taking responsibility for how you're feeling, and making sure that you're getting enough self-care in your day.
So before we jump into talking about our quote, we I'd say the biggest thing with combating negativity during these times is something again that we've touched on in previous episodes. So definitely go check those out. But the idea of focusing on the good news. It's so easy to fall and to get accustomed to the negative side of the news. But there has been some positive things that have come out of this world that we've been living in the last couple months, and so just a few here. NPR stated that through this whole COVID-19, um, more than 1 million people have recovered worldwide, and so well, it's easy to see the statistics and the numbers and the death tolls and the infection rates and so on and so forth. It's nice to see that people are recovering, and so, some of those people have been in their 90s and over 100, and so it's interesting to see those, and so that's pretty powerful. To when you start to pay attention to those, and then on May 3rd, towards the beginning of the month, Italy reported the lowest number of cases and deaths in nearly 2 months. And so with what had seemed like Italy was really just getting thrown all over the place when the pandemic hit, it's seeming like they're starting to hopefully see some light at the end of the tunnel and kind of moving forward and staying afloat. And then lastly, I believe Lindsay's mentioned this before, but John Krasinski started a YouTube channel. It's called Some Good News, and so he basically just goes through and just as it says, he kind of devotes his show. He's a newscaster, and he's just going through good news, of the good things that are happening, and so it was, it's become quite popular. It has close to 2.5 million subscribers, and so if you're ever finding yourself needing a positive or encouraging video or something funny or uplifting during these times, definitely go check that out. Just because some of the ones that we've seen, it's pretty interesting, and it's nice to see someone else making a difference and kind of turning some negative thoughts into positive ones with everything going on. So as promised, we like to end each episode with a quote, something that sticks out to us or something that's relative to the episode that we're on. And so the quote for today actually comes from Mark Chernoff. I believe he's so markandangel.com. They have a website. But I was scrolling through and saw this quote from them, and it's train your mind to see the good in everything. Positivity is a choice. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. And so I think, especially with everything that's been going on, it's important to train your mind to see the good in everything. And I truly believe that there is good in everything. Because you could, if it weren't for bad things, we would have no idea what it would be like to experience those good things or those good times, those good moments, just because we would have nothing to compare it to. And so I think super important as this topic of negative mindset, negative thought patterns. Um, positivity is a choice. You can choose to continue down and go down that negative thought pattern. You can kind of bring some truth into it, or bring some logic to it, or whatever that looks like for you. And choosing positivity, and really improving the quality of your thoughts.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think it's important to um, recognize the positives that are coming out of a situation, even in I think even in the darkest of times, there is some kind of silver lining or some kind of positivity that is happening in the world. I think I think back to um, hearing about those guys in Italy who found a way to 3D print something for some kind of respirator. I believe it's been a while since I read the article about it, but like I think a lot of innovation is born from these really difficult times. And I think it's fascinating to just look at where we are as a society and everything that people are doing to come together and improve the world around them, even though we're going through some of probably the difficult times I most difficult times I think anybody has really ever seen. Like I talked to my dad about it, and he was saying like he's never seen anything of this scale ever in his entire life, and I think it's just important to realize like it's really hard right now, but there is still a lot of good in the world, and finding those pieces of good I think can really help carry you through to whatever happens after this, where we go back to some quote unquote normal life. I think really focusing on those positive things can really help get you through to those times.
All right. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, we hope that everybody's staying safe out there, um, while also being mindful of these um, negative thoughts. It's so easy to fall into with everything that's going on. And so try and bring some positivity into that. We would love to hear how everybody's doing. Feel free to reach out to us, send us a DM, shoot us an email. We would love to chat and um, just talk to you about how things are going right now during these times. Um, we would appreciate if you gave us a follow wherever you're listening, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, wherever it is. Um, hit the like button, subscribe button, whatever um, function you have for wherever you're listening to us. We'll have a link to the show notes again, to some of the articles we had today, as well as just wanted to remind you guys of the resources that we have available on our website. Mental health resources, employment resources, money management resources, and just some fun additional resources for those affected by COVID. And we hope that those can shed some lights and bring some positivity your way, and help you during these times. Thanks again for listening, and tune in next time for another episode of The Disconnect.